welcome teachers and students to yet another writing workshop with yours truly, Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of composition. Up my sleeve today, I have a follow-up video from an earlier video I made that focused on poetry analysis, in which we're going to take a look at how to sustain cogent lines of reasoning in expository writing, but this time my twist is going to be with rhetorical analysis. And what students will see, teachers as well, is that the same heuristic I used for poetry analysis, literary analysis, is exactly the same one that we're going to use to house our body paragraphs for rhetorical analysis. So as always, we use the heuristic of the syllogistic method. And one of the things I've learned over time is this: when I begin to talk about Aristotelian theories and constructs like the syllogistic method, some students intellectually shut down and immediately by default say, "Oh, Mr. Kuhn, this is way too hard. I'm going to tune you out." So what I've done over the years is this: several children's bedtime stories are written syllogistically. They employ the syllogistic method in a very concrete, simple, accessible way. So in this particular piece, I'm going to use the classic children's story by PD Eastman entitled "Are You My Mother?" And I'm going to correlate the progression, like the narrative delineation of the story of "Are You My Mother?" in terms of how to create the line of reasoning and the cogency within a body paragraph when we perform rhetorical analysis. With that being said, please make sure you subscribe to my new YouTube channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of composition. Spread the word far and wide. Tell other students, tell other teachers, tell your colleagues, tell your friends to please subscribe so that we can grow and get our message out there. So in terms of the actual lesson plan and how I facilitate this, I get goofy, I get silly, because that's just my personality as a teacher. And I actually host a story time. And we sit down in a circle, very a la kindergarten, and I read "Are You My Mother?" to my students. And what I do as I read is basically break down that Eastman is going syllogistically throughout the whole piece. And I ask the question, what's the promise of the first premise? And in essence, every page of the story is either a first premise, a second premise, or a conclusion. So I give a quick lesson in deductive reasoning as we proceed through the story and explain and unpack the syllogism. In a few slides down the road here, I'm going to go over what the syllogistic method is in terms of its history, its execution, and its theory, and why Aristotle thunked it up in the first place. Something cool that you might want to do if you don't have a copy of "Are You My Mother?" or can't readily get your hands on it. In YouTube, there's actually some videos that read the story aloud and have illustrated renditions of it. So I'm going to pause right here and give you a preview of what that video looks like.
Up went the baby bird. But now, where was the snort going? Uh-oh! Oh! What is this snort going to...
Okay, so that's just a little snippet of it, just to give you a flavor of it and show you how enticing and pretty cool it is. So let me delve into the origins of the syllogistic method. So as I've alluded, it's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. It comes from Aristotle. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the townsboys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. It really is kind of akin to lawyer school today in terms of learning how to argue. And he would throw out these juicy essential questions, and you see them, to this day in some of the seminal texts from the Aristotelian tradition. And one notable one is Plato's Republic, in which they tussle with the following question: what is justice? So all these philosophical think tankers, the scholars, the philosophers, would step to the proverbial mic and they would give an articulation to their definition of what justice is. And Aristotle noted, just like us compositions often draw this conclusion, some students are really good at housing their arguments. They're very calculative, they're very methodical. Some kids get a little waylaid and discursive and break their lines of reasoning. And some kids just tank bomb it and they're all over the place. Here's the thing. All students are capable of really good thinking, but the trick is to think cogently on paper. So he had a eureka moment one day and he said, aha, I got it. In studying and breaking down the inner machinations of what the good orators were doing, he said they are thinking syllogistically. And this is what he meant by it. It's like a math formula. It's as if we're going from premise to conclusion, like 1 plus 2 equals 3. So let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. If I were to say to you, premise number 1, arsenic is deadly, you all would say, yes, Kristian, you're 100% true. That's 100% factual. You are right. But if I follow it up with premise number 2 and state, my dog ate arsenic, you're naturally going to conclude, uh-oh, Kristian, that's not going to bode well for your dog. Your dog's going to die. So we call that cogency in the Aristotelian tradition. In composition, you're probably familiar with the term line of reasoning. And all we mean by that is, on paper, when you write, you have to be very bulletproof in your logic. You have to be very organized, chronological, sequential, and have all the parts there. Otherwise, you're going to commit logical fallacies, and Aristotle called that enthymons. And what he meant by that is you either leave one part of the syllogism out, or you bring in extraneous information to break the line of reasoning. And students commit that faux pas often in their writing. So how do we morph Aristotle's heuristic and turn it into a heuristic for the purposes of performing rhetorical analysis? Well, I got you covered here. Surprise, surprise, it's actually the exact same heuristic that we used for literary analysis. And the first premise is going to be an argument in which we use terms, devices, techniques, rhetorical terms, devices, techniques. We have to keep in mind the demand of the assignment. We are not, under any circumstances, performing plot analysis or plot summation. Our goal is not to write a Cliff Note summary. We have to argue. And that begs the other question here. What are we doing? And we are engaged in an expository mode, rhetorical analysis. And we have to keep in mind that all expository writing is an act of argumentation. So in saying that, and really solidifying that, we have to keep in mind that that argument must be central. Old school College Board for FRQ1, which is the synthesis essay on the AP language exam, the College Board would state, your argument must be central. And I say that to my students for all of the expository modes. So here's a little trick. It's like a hack. If a student takes 3 sentences to house that first premise, they can keep the centrality of their argument and ensure that they're meeting the demands of the assignment and performing rhetorical analysis from top to bottom. I'm going to model this in a second, and students, you're going to have an opportunity to try your hand at writing a first premise on your own towards the end of the video. So again, it's 3 sentences. We have to use our terms, devices, techniques. Beginning in the 4th sentence, we're going to introduce textual support. And this comes in a teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing. You don't want to do one far more at the expense of the other. It is always good to balance things out. And again, we're going to do some exercises to make sure that we have ample support and analysis. And to borrow the analogy from PD Eastman's Are You My Mother, in a sense, we're going to put birds in the nest in that first premise. As we move to the second premise, the birds fall out of the nest because we're transitioning into the next part of the syllogism. And the goal is to return the birds to the nest. And I'm going to walk you through that whole process in just a second, right? So just explaining my analogy. the conclusion of the body paragraph. And we have to keep in mind that body paragraphs do need to be concluded. They do need to come full circle, because that's what syllogisms do, is where we're going to house the textual analysis. And this is the link and the echo, the promise back to the first premise and the thesis. All in all, this is going to take 10 to 12 sentences. So students often ask good questions. They're like, how many sentences is this going to take? Because this looks like it's going to be more than the 4 or 5 sentence baggers that I typically write. And I say, exactly. In order to have sufficient support and analysis, you really need to have a fully fleshed out argument. All right, moving on. In order to demonstrate this, I'm going to use a really cool piece. And it's a letter that Einstein wrote to his daughter. I will put copies of the letter and the writing workshop that I use with my students in the description of the YouTube video. So it's down there, free to download, so that you can use it with your students, or students, if you're doing this on your own, it's readily there for you at your fingertips, ready there for free access. So the question immediately becomes, what's a first premise look like? And I got you covered. Here is my first 3 sentences of my first body paragraph for this particular essay. Students are always full of good questions, and mine often ask, where do I begin, Mr. Kuhn? Where do I begin my analysis? And I say, start where the author starts, and give your reader some kind of indication that you have some sort of chronology, organizational scheme, a methodological approach to your analysis. So my students typically go top to bottom in their analysis and cross-weave when necessary. So to give my reader a good indication that I do have a sequence in mind, I do have a method, I use a stem. It's just 4 words and a comma, and it's this: right from the onset, comma. And again, that cues your reader into knowing that you're going to be very organized. So look where I go here. And also note how I drop my terms, devices, techniques. So here it is. Right from the onset, Einstein knows that his current conjectures might compromise his already questionable standing in the scientific community. Knowing that humanity's not evolved enough to receive his amended theories, he kindly asks his daughter to conceal his letter until the world is ready for such a profound answer to its mysteries. Science, in spite of its incredible advancements, has overlooked the biggest singular force, the power of love. All right, so earlier I said that the first premise is like putting the birds in the nest. And then as we move into the second premise, we're going to have to remove those birds from their nest. But ultimately, as we proceed throughout the syllogistic body paragraph, return the birds to the mother, return the birds to the nest. So we have to ask ourselves a question: what's being promised in that first premise? So with my students, I talk about that, the promise of the first premise. It's another way to teach a line of reasoning. It's another way to teach cogency. So let's revisit what I just wrote in those first 3 sentences, the first premise, and unpack the terms, devices, and techniques that are there. And you immediately notice, wait a second, Kristian is implying his terms, devices, techniques. Bingo. In the download of the writing workshop, you have access to my introductory paragraphs, and I have plenty of videos in my YouTube channel on full rhetorical analysis, so go back and view those. And I will make a video for the entire Einstein writing workshop. But up top in my thesis, I explicitly state the terms. So as not to be redundant, in the first premise, I imply them. So when I say conjectures, which I have highlighted there in green, I'm ultimately implying logos, right? So Einstein is very logos heavy up top. He's also concerned about his ethos, his standing, his reputation in the scientific community. And then the other thing that I'm doing here is focusing on the exigence or theme, the universal truth, that love is the driving force, the connecting force of the universe. And you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute, Kristian, you got three things going on here. And I say, yes, I do. I often tell my students multitask in this first premise because you don't want to do one paragraph ethos, one paragraph syntax, one paragraph tone, one paragraph logos. That's too plotting, it's too dutiful, too elementary, too basic, and it's not going to bode well in your overall score. So it's very elementary, and I even don't want my on-level ninth graders writing that way. It's too basic. So we got to ask ourselves the question as we move on to the fourth sentence. Are you my mother? We got to go quote and paraphrasing hunting, right? We got to get into the text and choose all the quotes and paraphrases for the three things that we promised. And in order to do that, we have to keep the first and the second premise connected, right? That's line of reasoning, that's cogency. So let me give you an example here of how we would move on to the second premise, which again begins the fourth sentence. So I'm going to have you go quote hunting based on my stem here. So it says, immediately, his first rhetorical move is to safeguard his ethos because quantum explanations of love surely will. And then I ask the question, are you my mother? So go quote hunting, right? Teachers, if you're watching this, have your students go to the board, give them a marker, give them a piece of chalk, and write down on the board the best quote to fill in the blank there. And so that there's no suspense or second guessing, I filled in the blank for you. This is the quote that I would put in there. So immediately, his first rhetorical move is to safeguard his ethos because quantum explanations of love surely will collide with the misunderstanding and prejudice in the world. That's the best ethos quote early up top of the paper. Again, because I have a methodological approach here. I have a chronology. So up top of the letter, that's the best quote to encapsulate and get to the basis of his ethos. I also want to note something here. My quote transitions are pretty smooth in the syllogistic body paragraph. And one thing I do to make sure that happens is I employ something called the 5-word rule. So you can see there that I have a whole bunch of words before I insert the quote, and the quote is small. If you use a minimum of 5 words, so not exactly, but a minimum of 5 words before the quote and keep the quote small, it should sound conversational. But we're not done. We can't end the body paragraph there. There are so many things that we promised in that first premise. Let's look at how we move on. So take it from the fourth sentence again, and let's see how we begin to move all the other quotes and paraphrases in here so that we return the birds to the nest. Immediately, his first rhetorical move is to safeguard his ethos because quantum explanations of love surely will collide with the misunderstanding and prejudice in the world. So again, you can hear that silky smooth quote transition. So when we quote, we have to analyze it. So look at the next move here. Knowing that the world in which he lives is one that is wrought by greed, destruction, war, and selfishness, Einstein employs his daughter to guard the letters as long as necessary, years, decades, until society is advanced enough to accept his profound theories on love. Again, that's the perfect quote for the ethos and the exigence, right? Two things that I promised in the first premise. Moving on. Ever since the advent of the modern sciences, man has sought the answers to solve the mysteries of the universe. Einstein, perhaps the greatest thinker known to history, posits that scientists forgot the most powerful unforeseen force. Well, let's move on because we're not done, right? We got still some things that we promised. Let's practice again going quote hunting and returning the birds to the nest. So fill in the blank here with the best quote. And again, look at where we're at in terms of the letter and just cherry pick the best one. Almost like a numerical listing in an equation, he enumerates the vast magnitude of love's eternal depth and reach. At first, Einstein suggests that, are you my mother? Let's bring the bird back to the nest. Again, students, go to the board, marker, chalk, put down what you think is the best quote to fill in there. Here's my version of it. Almost like a numerical listing in an equation, he enumerates the vast magnitude of love's eternal depth and reach. At first, Einstein suggests that love is light that enlightens those who give and receive it. And again, I'm using the 5-word rule, and that stays super, super cogent. My line of reasoning is utmost intact, right? There's no snarls here at all. There's no enthymums at all. So there's still more that we promise. So we got to ask ourselves the question, what else did we promise? And we're almost done, right? We're almost there. It is significant that he makes love and light proper nouns in his amended equation. Syntactically, this emphasis and formality allows him to deliver his grand conclusion that love is God and God is love. Now, one of the things we need to do is come full circle. We have to add the conclusion on this. And this is where we return all the birds back to the nest, right? Syllogisms are like thinking circles. So you need about, I usually take 1, 2, no more than 3 sentences to bring it all the way back. So here's how I would conclude this first body paragraph. The root of most scientific inquiry is to obtain the knowledge of the gods and of the heavens, to unlock the secrets of the universe. And here is Einstein, equipped with the keys to the door of everything. Love is the ultimate answer. Love is the common denominator of every single scientific inquiry. But he knows such a truth is scandalous heresy. All right, very cool. My beloved students, do you want to give this a whirl? So I got something up my sleeve here. Let's build another syllogism. Let's build the second body paragraph together syllogistically. And what we're going to do is this. You're going to follow my lead. I have written for you the first premise for the next body paragraph. What I want you to do with your teacher, or you can do it on your own for practice, is to finish this, right? Get all the birds back to the nest. So I'm going to multitask the first premise again. We'll unpack it. We'll make sure that we fully understand what the promise is. And then we'll get the birds back to their nest in 10 to 12 sentences. We're just going to follow the exact same pattern, the exact same formula, stick to the bearings of the heuristic, and bring it full circle so that our line of reasoning stays intact and so that we're staying utmost cogent. So here it is. As the letter progresses, Einstein shifts his focus to amending his most noteworthy theory, E equals mc squared. Substituting the overarching universal theme of love into the variable, he delivers the thrust of his exigence. Love is the meaning and purpose of all existence. Almost as if whispering a scandalous hush, Einstein employs his daughter to keep the secret under wraps until humanity arrives at a place where it can accept the wholly embrace this concept. So yet again here, let's do the promise of the first premise. I said exigence, like I actually dropped a rhetorical term device technique. So we know we have to focus on the universal truth, the universal theme, right? The gist of why Einstein is writing this. We're also going to parcel out E equals mc squared in terms of the logos to see how he substitutes the variable of love into that. Also, by extension, when I talk about the secret and the scandalous hush being whispered, we're into tone, right? We haven't talked about tone yet. So that's where we're going to go in this particular body paragraph. So my friends, my students, return every bird to the nest. At this stage of the game, go quote hunting, go paraphrase hunting. I promised you 2 things, so you're going to need sufficient support and analysis in order to make that happen. All right, I'm signing off. Happy teaching, happy writing. If you want to drop me an email, Feel free to teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I know some students and teachers are a little shy on the trigger of sending me an email if you got questions or anything of that nature, but I love to respond to people. It flatters me to the belly button that teachers and students are using my heuristics throughout the country. I really, really love that. It's super cool, and it makes me very proud that that is happening. So don't be trigger shy to send me an email if you got some questions. Also note that I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project. I present for NCTE and the College Board Perfection Learning. So if you want to stay abreast of my comings and goings, I have a website called teachinghowtowrite.com. You can see what's going on throughout the calendar year with my professional developments and my presentations. Students know that I have a tutoring business. It's entitled Write at Ivy Write. I am an Ivy League graduate. I did my graduate degrees from Ivy League institutions. I'm expert on the college personal statement, so come time to apply to college, I'm happy to help you with that. Also, very willing to get you over the hurdle of your AP exams. I've been teaching more than 2 decades, expert on this stuff, and I've helped thousands of kids be successful in terms of executing their compositions, no matter what it is. All right, I'm at the end. I will follow up with argument, persuasion, synthesis, and research, all while using children's stories to demonstrate how to manipulate the syllogistic method heuristic. Hope all is well. Happy teaching, happy writing.